course.
Of course. I mean, that's the number one question. Someone, you just retire. You're 65. You're pretty young. But you start to think, well, what happens next? What happens in 10 years? What happens in 20 or 30?
Yes.
People are living a long time.
Yes, they are. It's very true. So let's pretend that someone is coming to you with a concern, a financial concern, or a medical concern. Where do you begin with someone?
Well, we start off by getting a sense of what their situation is. Because the situation of somebody who's 65 and newly retired might be very, very different from someone who's just thinking about planning when they're 85 and have had a diagnosis of Parkinson's or Alzheimer's. Depending on where you are, we start out with the foundational issues. Right now, most people, when they come to me, they're still able to make medical decisions and financial decisions for themselves. But over time, you might not be able to do it anymore. And one of the most common misconceptions is, well, I'm married or I have children, and these people are going to be able to automatically step in for me if I get sick. And people believe, and probably with good reason, that my husband or my daughter is going to be able to step in for me and make those kinds of decisions. And that's just not true. If you haven't done any planning, then there's nobody who's authorized to make legal decisions, financial decisions, or medical decisions for you. Your family, what they can do is they can go to the probate court and talk to a probate court judge and get authority to do that. But that's really expensive. It takes a long time. Our courts are great, but they're really overburdened.
Sure.
And just like a lot of areas in society are right now. So what might be a relatively simple process ends up taking months or years.
And you need a decision
and you need
now.
a decision now. Yes, if your grandmother's in a nursing home and you need to pay her bills, but you can't get access to the money because she's sick and she can't sign her checks anymore.
Yes.
You need something to happen right now.
So what do you tell them?
Well, I tell them the best thing to do is plan in advance. You can have a durable power of attorney to make economic, financial, legal decisions for you. And you can name someone now while you're healthy who can do those things for you.
Yes.
And sometimes people say, well, can I get one off the internet? I've seen them on there.
Yeah.
And that can be a real mistake. A lot of those powers of attorney online are intended for younger people who are worried about fraud, which unfortunately does happen.
Yes.
And they're worried about giving too much power to their agent.
Yes.
But if you don't give your agent enough power, if you're an older person, you trust your family, you trust your spouse, you want to give them all the power.
Yes.
Because if they don't have the ability to do something, if, say, the power of attorney doesn't let them transfer your house, they can't take steps to protect it. They have to go back to court, back to the probate court judge, and ask for permission. And they might not get it. The probate court judge has a lot of discretion, and some of them have different feelings about, what protecting a house might mean.
Sure.
And how your money should be spent.
Interesting. In some states, because my mother in her elder years was in Arizona, which has paperwork like I couldn't even imagine anybody bothering to have this much paperwork. And I needed 4 power of attorneys, 4 different ones.
Wow.
And so let's not talk about Arizona since we're not there.
Yes.
In the state of Massachusetts, does a durable do everything, or do you need real estate and medical, and do you need special ones in addition?
Well, what a durable power of attorney, it basically does whatever the document says it does. We don't have a statutory power of attorney in the state that has been created by the state government in terms of it can do this or it can do that. So it has the powers that are written right there in the document. If it doesn't say you can do something, you can't.
Okay.
Usually where people will have something separate is for healthcare. So they'll have one for finances and legal and one for medical decisions.
Okay.
And that'll be called a healthcare proxy.
Yes.
And so it's a little bit simpler than Arizona.
Yeah.
We don't have all 4. But it's important in the one that you have to make sure it gives you the power that you need.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's why it's important to see somebody who specializes in this.
Yes.
Because elder law is confusing, and it's something that an attorney who does a lot of real estate or who does family law, who does divorce, might know a little bit about, but it's not going to be their focus, and they haven't thought about what's going to happen if someone's in a nursing home, and how are we going to protect the house?
Yes. And I would guess that that's an area of the law that we'll see changes in as the boomers go through, and you start to have large numbers of people who are elderly and are dealing with this kind of issue. We can be pretty sure. Yes.
We
I'll
already
bet.
have.
Yes.
There was a massive change in how the law worked in 2006 that has made it a lot more difficult for somebody who's thinking about planning at the last minute. If you're coming in and you're thinking, well, what's going to happen 5 or 10 years down the road, you have a lot of options. If you're thinking, well, what's going to happen to me next month, you still have options, and that's something that's important to know. Even if you or your loved one is going into a nursing home tomorrow, you can do things to protect their house. You might be able to do things to create a fund to take care of them and to provide what Medicaid doesn't. Because Medicaid can be a great resource, but it might not cover dental care. It might not cover eye care, and it might not cover just the extras that make life in a nursing home less difficult.
Yes.
And there are ways to make sure that there's a fund, a sum of money that can pay for those extras. But you have to do the planning.
Now, is it more difficult for someone who is dependent on Medicaid rather than Medicare?
So that's a great question, because that's a huge distinction. And everybody, if you've worked a certain number of years, or your spouse has, and you're over 65, you get Medicare. And Medicare is a type of health insurance.
Yes.
Health insurance doesn't cover long-term care. There are no health insurance policies that'll cover nursing homes. They might have where they cover it for a very limited period of time, a maximum of 100 days. And that's a maximum. You won't always get those 100 days.
The 100 days.
Looks
good on paper. Doesn't work that way. Yeah.
They have standards for, are you getting better? And if you're not getting better, if you're not in rehab, you're not improving in a nursing home, then your period of Medicare coverage can be a lot shorter. It can be 20 days. It could be 40.
Wow. Who makes that decision?
The nursing home has staff that make that decision. It's a tough call, because if they leave you on too long, they can be accused of Medicare fraud, of billing Medicare more than they're supposed to, and they can lose their Medicare funding for all of their patients,
for everybody
in the entire nursing home, and they never want that to happen.
Of course not.
So a lot of them are going to be conservative, and I have so many people coming into me saying, they took my mom off of Medicare. I don't understand why. She's still getting rehab.
Yes.
And that can happen. So once Medicare runs out, the question is, well, now what?
Yeah, what takes over?
What takes over?
Is there something that takes over?
There are a couple of options. Some people who have thought about this well in advance have long-term care insurance. Long-term care insurance, it has its upsides. It's a private fund. You've paid into it over the years, and it's going to pay out now to cover costs in assisted living, to cover costs at home, to cover costs in a nursing home.
Yes.
But a lot of people don't have it. It's expensive.
Yes.
Sometimes I heard a couple come to me saying they'd been quoted for a $300 a day policy. They were both in their 80s, good health, but in their 80s, $12,000 a year.
Yes.
So it just wasn't in their budget. If you are already ill, it's too late. You're not going to get a policy if you've already been diagnosed, or if you're relatively young, but you have a long-term illness like multiple sclerosis or something like that.
Sure.
You just won't get coverage. So it's a great resource for people who can get it, but it's expensive, and a lot of the times the policies are smaller than the costs.
Yes.
We have Bear Hill up in Stoneham, I think it is.
Yes.
Right now, one of the typical rates for a semi-private room, so this is a shared room, is $425 a day.
Yes.
Overwhelming.
Yes.
That's $13,000 a month. I think it's $160,000 a year. And most long-term care policies just aren't that big. And so you don't have a policy. Now what?
Yes.
Well, you can pay out of pocket. So you can pay the nursing home, $425 a day,
Yes.
$13,000 a month. And for a lot of people, that's going to